Welcome to the Million Dollar Nonprofit Podcast. I'm Tom Kelly, your nonprofit catalyst. As the founder of Charity Auctions Today and Donor Books, I've spent almost 2 decades helping organizations like yours break through fundraising barriers, engage communities on a deeper level, and accelerate meaningful growth. In this podcast, along with my incredible guests, we'll uncover transformational ideas, tackle challenges head-on, and share insider strategies that you won't find anywhere else. Each episode is designed to take your nonprofit to the $1 million mark and beyond, because impact doesn't scale by chance, it scales by choice. So let's get started. On today's episode, I'm joined by Christine Robertson. She's a financial data expert with years of experience helping nonprofits improve how they manage their donor relationships. We dove into the process of transitioning from spreadsheets to a CRM and the critical importance of keeping donors' data up to date and how a well-organized database can elevate personalized donor interactions. I asked some great questions that you won't believe the answers that she gave. We also discussed key CRM features to look for and how to make sure your donor management system can scale with your organization. Plus, Christine shared some surprising strategies that nonprofits can use to double or even triple their donations through smart data management. You definitely don't want to miss this episode. Christine, welcome to the Million Dollar Nonprofit Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I know we're going to be talking about donor management systems and relationships and segmenting our donors. And I've talked to hundreds of nonprofits, and the majority of them all seem to still use, it doesn't matter whether they're small or large, Excel spreadsheets and Google Docs to manage their donors and really just kind of manage their data. What are some of those systems that some of these nonprofits should be implementing that are essential, that should be an essential part of their nonprofit from early stages on up to the big people, the big guys?
Sure. So first of all, I do want to say, if you have Excel spreadsheets and Google Docs, and that's all you have, obviously that's a place we can start. If you have a CRM that you're paying money for and all of your data is in your Excel spreadsheets, that is problematic. And that might be a segue off of where you were going. But as someone who regularly is convincing people to make sure all of your data is in your system of record, I have to say that. I really think the biggest piece with our data is starting to think about how do we use our data to build a relationship. The dollars and the facts and all of those pieces of information are so much more than sometimes we think they are. And how we store them is how we can use them, and how we use them is how we build our relationships. So it's all one big integrated piece and not separate things that we can keep in silos.
Well, and I've a lot of the nonprofits that I've spoken to in the past, like you said, they have a CRM, and then they don't. It's too complicated. So then they're like, hey, I'm just going to do the easy thing that I know how to do, which is a Google sheet or an Excel spreadsheet. But the CRM is so powerful if they just kind of take the time to really kind of fill in the data. It really has a lot of benefits that, will just make their life easier. What are some of those things when you see a situation like that you're really kind of saying to those nonprofits to convince them to start using that CRM a little bit more?
I had this conversation with someone yesterday who shall remain nameless, of course. They asked me if I could pull a master spreadsheet out of their database so that they could use it all year long and send mailings to their donors and reach out and just keep using that spreadsheet because they felt more comfortable with the spreadsheet. And my immediate response was, well, technically, yes, I can do it, but no, I'm not going to. Because as soon as I pull that spreadsheet, the data is static. It becomes stale. So the second that someone adds a new address to your CRM, the spreadsheet is wrong. The second they add a new gift, the second they update what that donor's communication preferences are, none of that is going to flow through to that spreadsheet. So it means you're working off of old data. So if someone's changed their name, if they've moved, if they've died, any number of things can happen that should change how you communicate that don't if it's a static, stale spreadsheet. Beyond that, there's also the piece of so many of the CRMs that are reputable and solid in our industry. I want to throw that out there because there are definitely things that aren't. But So many of them include things like online giving pages that integrate directly in. So I can put a link on my website. When someone gives, that flows into my CRM. I can send emails out of those where I can send, group together my constituents who are all passionate about the same thing, send an email and see exactly who got the email, maybe even more data as far as who opened or read or who made a gift as a result. So there's a lot more pieces that come together in a holistic CRM. That said, of course, more features usually does equal more cost. And so I think that leads into the conversation of what features do you need? How many records do you have? We all know some of the big name tools in the industry. I work in some of them. I think they have great use for organizations in that position. They also aren't for everyone, and they may be too much, which is part of what you said earlier. Is some of these systems are so complex and organizations genuinely don't have people on teams who know how to use them, or they're using them as a side to their full-time job and they don't have time to invest in them. So an overly complex system wouldn't be ideal for everyone, but something is certainly better than just having data that you're not updating or that you don't know how to work with it because it's in a format like Excel where there's a lot of limits and there's very few ways you can manipulate that and update it.
At what point in a nonprofit's growth stage do you think it becomes essential to move from like spreadsheets to kind of a more complex or donor management system or nonprofit management system?
I think that if an organization has an eye to grow, which if you're listening to this podcast, I hope that is where you are. I think that really when you're in that mindset, that needs to be something that you build into your budget and make a priority. I know that there are certain tools. Little Green Light is the first one that comes to mind. I don't work with them. I don't have any connection. I worked with them in the past. But I say that to say, I know their tiers can be pretty affordable. As of the last time I looked at their website, there was one plan that was under $500 for the whole year for a smaller org with a smaller number of constituents. I can't promise any pricing on that, so please don't ever quote me on that and try to get it honored. But $500 wouldn't be a huge commitment to gain features such as those emails, being able to send email marketing, being able to have that online giving form, tracking event attendance. There's a lot there that you can't do easily in Excel. I think the other thing to Excel that I want to say too, and this may be a bit off of that, is I don't know about you, but I have sorted my Excel spreadsheets and mismatched my data more than once on accident. And that does scare me with Excel for people who that's all you're using, because if you missort and you don't realize it quickly, you could corrupt all of your data and essentially lose so much history in that. So I think that's also a thing to consider as you're deciding, can I afford something or can I look into that, is can you afford not to find a way to do that? Because what happens if you corrupt all of your data or the spreadsheet is lost or missorted or things like that?
Well, and I think the biggest tip so far that we heard is that when you export your data, it's static. It's like you can't change it. Like there's so many different changes that could happen that once you export it, it's no longer the most up to date information that you have. And definitely make sure to stay to the end. And I'm going to give my top 5 takeaways from this episode. But that was just the first one that I love, that you should really think twice about exporting it and just living off of that one export, because it's a living, your donor management system and your donor database is a living, breathing, document that is constantly updating. And especially if you're using some of these tools where, if something happens on your website, it automatically updates your donor CRM. And if you're not to that point yet, then there's definitely going to be some tools that we can suggest towards the end that are really cost effective for the small organizations, and then we'll give some of the higher level ones down the road too for some of the more established organizations. How can a database and the way that you approach kind of the donor data, kind of help organizations build stronger and more personalized relationships with their donors?
That's a great question. So my whole career has been pretty much being a data person, either directly at an organization or consulting other organizations in using that data. And early in my career, I was told, well, you're not a fundraiser. You're not really a fundraiser. You're support staff. But the longer I was in the departments and the more I gained my own voice, the more I realized I am absolutely a fundraiser. I may not be the one going and asking, but I'm the one who puts together the reports to give to the major gift officer. I'm the one who I see the names and I go, wait, this person is connected to that person. There's something you need to look into here. All of those pieces come together, and having that vision of your data is such a part of being able to identify who might be a major gift prospect, or who should you maybe do a softer stewardship touch, or even just a softer relationship touch because you know that they just lost a family member or a job or whatever. All of that needs to be in a database, because otherwise one person on your team may have this knowledge in their head, but no one else has it available if it's just in someone's head. And so I think having that CRM and having that policy of everything goes there creates that ability for your whole team to be relational rather than one or two people.
And when you work with some of the larger, the most successful nonprofits that implement this the right way, do they have a dedicated person that is just, doing this almost like donor stewardship or donor management on such a level where they're really looking for those really close relationships? They're looking for all of this little tiny data. Like, who is that person at these nonprofits? Like, what's their title? Who, if you're a small nonprofit looking to like, hey, I want to implement this, who's that hire I need to find that will focus on this? What is the name of that position? What's a character trait that you think would be a great person to kind of do this donor stewardship?
So the titles are different with, I think, almost every organization I work with. That's why I was kind of smiling when you said that. I think one of the areas where I see this as a problem is that very often smaller organizations will say, so-and-so has extra time, let's assign this to them. And that person doesn't have an aptitude or an interest for working with data. So I think the first piece I would say to your question is find somebody who actually likes getting in and working with numbers and data and fixing it. They're very often the people who are very focused on detail and consistency. And a big chunk of that is because detail and consistency are what makes your CRM, what makes your system work. If I enter the same information 3 different ways, pulling it back out is going to be very, very challenging. If I always do it the same way, it makes it a lot simpler. So that's where I would say finding people who have an aptitude for technology, who aren't scared of technology, who have a consistency in what they do. Those are people who are more likely to be able to be trained and learn the tool and work with it.
Have you worked with organizations that when they find that person, or maybe even a team of people, and they break up their donor management into individuals to just do the donor stewardship portion of it? Do they incentivize those individuals based on like how much donation revenue that they were able to bring in? Have you seen any ways that kind of set goals or KPIs that they can assign to them that would make kind of managing that donor information and utilizing it to attract more donations from it? Have you seen any things that any KPIs or data or incentives that larger organizations have done that maybe a smaller organization can implement?
I haven't, but I really would like to. One of the things that I have seen so often is that the data person is one of the lower paid members of the team, and all of the opportunities to promote go to major gift officers or maybe an events person. And the data person is very often seen as kind of, I hate to say that they're just the lower level of the office. For me personally, that was something I ran into earlier in my career and ultimately went into consulting because there was no room to grow and promote within the organization I was in at the time. And while I love what I do and I love consulting and I love getting to work with a wide range of organizations, I don't like that is a part of nonprofit culture, because I think having someone on your team with a skill set to grow and manage the data is so key to having good fundraising and good relationships, that I would like to see it elevated within our industry to the point where if you're good with data, like you said, there's a reward. There's an incentive to be good with that and to improve the ROIs, to, how are the mailings doing? Because your mailings are only as good as your data. So if your mailings are raising significant amount of money for your funds, I think that should be treated the same as a major gift officer who's making an ask and seeing that revenue come in that way. So I think truthfully, our industry needs to grow in that area. Some organizations are doing better, but overall, I feel like that's an area that we really need to improve.
What do you think are some of the challenges nonprofits face when tracking major gifts like manually on Excel spreadsheets? And how does like a database or a CRM resolve a lot of these issues?
I think one of the biggest ones would be, do you have everything in your spreadsheet that you actually need to do an adequate tax receipt? My first thought is, well, what if I gave you a stock instead of a check? Do you have everything in your spreadsheet to actually give me a legitimate receipt for my stock? Or are you going to receipt me for an amount, which by the way is wrong? You should always tell me how many shares I gave, what day I gave them, what type of stock it is, not what it was valued at, because my value might actually be different than yours depending on the time of day and all of those things. So are you set up to be able to adequately receipt? Are you set up to be able to really steward that relationship, to see how many times have you spoken to this donor in the last 6 months or a year? Who at your organization is building that relationship? Maybe you have a column for that in your spreadsheet, but then how do you know from your spreadsheet, what is their lifetime giving? What is their giving just this year? What is their giving in different categories? Are they giving to different types of funds within your organization, designations, things like that? So I think it's really quickly, there's so many questions I would ask of, how are you tracking this well? What are you doing to keep this correct? I would be very concerned that you could do all of that well in a spreadsheet.
Well, and it kind of goes back to our point earlier where the spreadsheet just, unless you automatically have a way of updating it from your website or, across your entire organization, the data is just not going to be 100% accurate 100% of the time. And I think that's kind of where a lot of the smaller nonprofits kind of fail, is because they're relying on the manual entry. And if it's, just one or two people that are really running the nonprofit, it's like, oh, I'll come back to that maybe on Monday or maybe next week or every Wednesday during this window of time. I'm going to spend 2 hours a day updating my data information. Well, what if something happens and you can't do it? It's like, and then it just kind of spirals out of control. And just having and being able to invest in a system that can just auto update and take that work off of you is definitely a great low-hanging fruit that an organization can implement right away to just get the ball rolling on that.
Absolutely.
What advice would you give a small nonprofit considering investing in a database solution, but concerned about the costs?
I would absolutely encourage them to ask a lot of questions and find other organizations that are using tools that you might be interested in. So one of the best resources I've seen, and this isn't really a software I would recommend for a smaller organization, but within the Razor's Edge community, there is a Facebook group with thousands of Razor's Edge users. It is not run by Blackbaud, the company that owns Razor's Edge. It is user run. So you get all different kinds of experiences mentioned. Some of the things said in the group are true. Some of the things said in the group are not. I don't want to get into that. But the part about that group that I wanted to mention is it's a good way to get a user experience that's not being condensed or streamlined or whatever by the company selling the tool. For a season, I did sell some software tools. And so I say this to say, I know how hard it is sometimes to be the person selling where you're trying to tell someone what the tool does or doesn't do. And sometimes they didn't tell you everything you needed to hear to be able to adequately answer their questions. So I want to give some grace to the software salespeople. They're not all out there trying to just pull the wool over your eyes. But they have goals to meet. They have sales to make. And so sometimes I think they will say, yes, it can do that, even if it may not do that for you, or even if it may be really hard to do that, or whatever the case may be. So maybe it's they don't understand what your needs are fully. Maybe it's they just want to make a sale. I can't speak to that. But talking to people who are at organizations, getting their perspective would be key to really getting an understanding of how well that would work for you. Finding other organizations in your area is even better. I think a lot of times, the more you know someone in person, the easier it is to say, hey, what are you doing for this? How does that work? What does that look like? I love getting to go to my local AFP meetings or my local other nonprofit meetings and hearing what's going on there and just getting that pulse. So I'd start with some of those areas and talk to the software companies themselves. Definitely, I would ask a lot of questions about areas that are specific to your organization. If you do a lot of events, ask about how they track for events. Do they have event registration pages? How much does it cost to use each different piece? Are all of the components included, or do you have any additional fees? That's super important to know
That's a very important point, because a lot of them are hidden behind paywalls, and they get you in at the low price, and then it's like, oh, you want that feature, our most popular one?
Now you have to pay more. So asking all of that up front to know, asking what does renewal look like? So if I sign today, how long is this price my price? When do you change your rates? Because let's be honest, everyone does. So do you change them every year? Or am I locked in for 3 years? What does that look like? So I'd ask a lot of those questions. Sometimes I think it's helpful to hear from other people in a similar type of organization as you. But I would also say don't put too much stock in that, because sometimes they may be similar in mission, but very different in fundraising practice. So always take it with a bit of a grain of salt, I think, to kind of get to the heart of, does your fundraising model line up with ours? Would we do things the same as you? Would that work for us? Every organization is very similar in some ways and very different in others. So you always have to kind of weigh that out.
And, what are some of the bare bones features that a nonprofit should have in their database that could be part of a free plan or a low cost plan for some of these CRMs, but that are really kind of the essentials? I know we can get into some really detailed features because they all have them, but what would be just maybe the top few that you think, for a bare bones, really cost effective, just to get started, should be considered and should have?
I think you really need to have the basics about, I'm going to say constituents. I know different organizations have different language, but I'm going to say your basics about your constituent. You need to know their name. You need to know their address. You need to know phone number, email address. How are they connected to you? That gets classified into lots of different codes in different systems, but it's really important. Are they an alumni? Are they a board member? Is this a business versus an individual? You need those kinds of classifications. If you have organizations, you need contacts. So if I'm working with ABC Foundation, who do I call? I think having online giving should be a requirement in this day and age, because every one of us needs to do online pages. We need to be working on that. I think email, again, should be just a bare bones requirement, because so much of what we're doing is via online and email solicitation. I think beyond those things, requirements may differ a bit by organization. Not everyone needs a volunteer module or a membership module or an event module. So I think those are things that maybe you do, but not everyone does. I think having relationships to track families, to know that maybe my spouse and I both give, and maybe we're both in your system. You need to know that we're connected to each other so you don't send us 2 pieces of mail. So some of those kinds of things I would say are part of that bare bones too.
And, with the bare bones, it comes with the next question, which is going to be a little bit difficult to answer because I don't think you could put a price tag on it. But, what would you say that when somebody implements a database going from spreadsheets to their first database, what do you think that equates to in annual donation increase? I don't want to put a dollar amount on it because everybody's different, but is it a 2x, a 3x, a 5x, a 10x? What is a good, like, hey, if we implement this, we can, if we do it right, we can expect probably this much of a growth?
I think it would at least be 2x or 3x. And I think part of that is it's a longer term. This is a game of chess. It's not a one and done process, but investing in a CRM, it's not just investing in next year's in fundraising. It's investing in the future of fundraising for the duration. Even if you go from one CRM to another, the fact that you started in a CRM and your data was all put in the right place, you started tracking this information, that history can go with you into every system. I had a client this week that they have data in their system dating back to the 1970s. And I don't normally see that far back, but it was so beautiful to see. They haven't had their software since this particular software since then. It did not exist in the 1970s. But now they have that history because they've just moved it from system to system, and they can say what their giving has been over the course of 5 decades. So it's long term, I think.
Yeah. Well, my top 5, I knew I said I was going to give about 5, tips on what I kind of pulled out of this conversation. And so far, this is what I've got. In the world of CRMs, having something is better than having nothing. And I think that's probably the first place to start, right? You said a great thing about exporting your data. And once you export it, it stays in the past. It doesn't update automatically. The likelihood of that data being outdated goes through the roof pretty fast. And a database basically helps the whole team have a more personal relationship with the donors rather than just 1 or 2 people that basically might be the founders or in that position to begin with. And then, when you're searching for, different databases, there's a ton of them out there. Compare them. You said talk to the nonprofits, talk to the software, or talk to other nonprofits, talk to software providers, and then ask as many questions as possible. And then I think the number one feature that you said that is a must-have on the list is, something that has gets into the classification of each donor, gets into the personal records, not personal records, but personal information. Find out who are their family members, what are they interested in, what things, what are their hobbies, what are all the great stuff that you can personalize your communication to them. I think that's probably the biggest thing with this is being able to personalize communication, especially if you want to, ask them for more donations down the road. But, this has been, Christina, a great conversation. I know you work with nonprofits all the time, implementing, donor databases, and you work with some of the largest nonprofits out there. How can people get more information on what you do and maybe even get into your world and be able to ask you questions? I know you have a very strong LinkedIn presence, and I know you ask a lot of questions there and you answer a lot of questions there. How can people find out more information and really kind of continue the conversation outside of this podcast?
So LinkedIn is a great place to reach out to me. I don't really do other social media. One is enough. But my company is a company called Impact, NPACT. So certainly can reach out to our team there. We do work primarily on the donor CRM side. We work primarily with Razor's Edge and Virtuous. That could change at some point in time, but at this point in time, those are the two I work in. I do have team members who work in Financial Edge and Sage, as well as a few other things. But for the most part, those are areas that we're focused in.
And what if there's a nonprofit that's listening that is currently using one of those platforms, but they're not utilizing it to its full ability? Is that something that you can take over and help out with?
Yeah, absolutely. A big part of what I do is consulting in Razor's Edge and a little bit in Virtuous. I'm mostly in Razor's Edge at the moment. I do everything from training people how to do things. I do database assessments where I come in and do a deep dive into the system and write out all of my observations about how are you using this part? What are your code tables looking like? What do I think should be cleaned up? And I do also consulting hours, which are a combination of training as well as getting into databases and doing work for clients. So I may do an import or a data cleanup project on their behalf. Sometimes I sit and help someone else coach them through something so they can gain a new skill. Lots of different pieces in there.
Well, Christina, this has been a great conversation. And I know everybody that's listening that is currently either in Excel, spreadsheets, or Google Docs is definitely now thinking about implementing a CRM. And if you guys have any questions, definitely reach out, follow Christine on her LinkedIn account. Christine, thank you so much for being on the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. If you'd like free resources to take your nonprofit to the $1 million mark, visit realtomkelly.com/playbooks. And because I'm committed to helping nonprofits maximize their impact and reach as many people as possible, contact us at hello@realtomkelly.com to explore bringing me in to speak at your next event. And as always, I'm looking forward to sharing more transformative insights with you on our next episode.